this man has been very, very quiet over the years, and so I'll not tell you who he is. Thank you.
But it was very strategic and instrumental into where the country is today, and we'll hear more about this endeavor later on. So you shared how the country is doing compared to the other Asian countries. Can we talk about collaboration? I mean, what role did the private sector and play in this development and growth? Not only the public sector, we spent a lot of time talking about government initiatives and our mystery person on the private side. But perhaps you can go into a little bit more.
Well, public-private partnerships have never been implemented so strategically and efficiently than now. Perhaps over the last 10 years. It used to be that all infrastructure projects in the Philippines were funded by government loans. IMF, World Bank, Japan, JICA, etc., Australia, SIDA from Canada. Nowadays, infrastructure projects are internally funded. Schumart, we have a representative partner here from Schumart. Schumart is now called SMDC, Schumart Development Corporation, and they're funding highways, construction of highways, and toll roads. So this is new. This is new. So I think, and many of the big companies, including San Miguel Corporation, they're now into building airports and maintaining airports. That used to be a purely government function. So now we're getting there.
So internally, there's a lot of collaboration. There's been investment in education, strategic partnerships in place. I'd like the panel to comment on just relationship within the ASEAN region in general. How, now that we've sort of risen from the ashes and are hoping to resume our places, the pearl of the Orient again, how is it within the region? What is the perception of our Asian neighbors? Where are we competing neck to neck in ASEAN? We'd be interested to hear.
Dennis, do you want to go first? Or? Okay. So, sure. There's head-to-head competition in a lot of the sort of intermediate steps in the supply chain, especially in things like semiconductors and in areas like electronics. A lot of the assembly work is still done in the Philippines. There's a lot of software development in the Philippines that people are not often aware about from the outside. Generally, I think around Asia, and I go to different Asian places a lot, the perception of the Philippines is very positive. There's not a sense of these are people we can't trust or these are people that we can't deal with. I think that in the old days, because of some very high-profile kidnappings 20 years ago, there was a lot of concern. I don't hear that anymore. So that's kind of loud by its silence. And I think that in general, the domestic rollout of bottom of the pyramid kind of ideas, how to help rural communities and so forth, are things that would apply very well across other parts of the world. And that kind of contrasts with a lot of the rollout you see in the interior of China. Inside China, people are really focused on China. You go to a conference about, anything about China, that's going to be the topic of discussion. They won't ask about other countries in the region, right? Whereas in, a conference like this, there's a lot lower barriers for people to take ideas, start in one place, grow them around the region.
The only collaborative ASEAN initiative I've seen is in the intellectual property area to harmonize research, and the Philippines, for example, has invested substantial resources in the last few years to be a center of patent research, which surprised me. Then I discovered that it had a lot more to do with science and engineering learning process. So they were using the patent databases to understand previous technology work. And so this was actually done in collaboration with other ASEAN patent offices.
Okay, I'm going to get into trouble by asking the question. What's the status of the ASEAN FTA, Free Trade Agreement, and also how that relates with the American administration's efforts on TPP? Because I don't know.
Just a couple of days ago, the ASEAN economic ministers were here on the roadshow, and that was discussed. The free trade agreement is still being discussed, but they want this to be on stream by 2015. And I think most Asian countries are comfortable with cramming. So I think that it can be done within the next couple of years. The one big question about the ASEAN system is we always decide on a consensus basis. In other words, all 10 countries must agree. Otherwise, the issue will be, well, continue to talk and talk and talk about it. And we're kind of good at talking. But when a decision is made and we move forward, the whole 10 countries take advantage of it. So, and I think that more and more the ASEAN process, where we now have 2 summits a year, where all the heads of state, heads of government meet twice a year, where it used to be once a year. And before, it used to be only when there was a crisis. So you can see the transformation also of the ASEAN process. So now the free trade agreement is one that is very, very much in focus. The intellectual property rights is also another because, well, guess what? Name any high-end product and you'll find it in ASEAN for a fraction of its actual price. So there, and so many more things going on in ASEAN that unless you're in the meetings every time, one kind of loses track. But as far as free trade agreement is concerned, yes, 2015 is the target.
So, what would be your observations, Professor Dasher, on a going forward basis? I mean, we have countries like Mexico and Canada who seem to be codependent on trade with the U.S. Obviously, the border is right there. Do we see something along those lines with regards to the Asian countries? Have you seen movement in that direction where some more than others are going to be dependent for either services or products or on the trade front? I know from a food perspective that we've had to import some of the agricultural products from our neighboring countries, the Philippines in particular, but are there any observations on that front? Or
well, actually, I'm looking a lot at entrepreneurial areas that are pretty technology intensive. And what I'm seeing in more advanced economies like Japan and Korea is that the domestic market is so tightly closed and controlled by a small number of large companies that entrepreneurs don't have much chance. The Koreans have noticed this more than the Japanese have. And so there's quite a movement for Korean entrepreneurs to come here or to grow their markets here before they grow the market back in Korea. Export-led growth is kind of the standard pattern for economies like that. That's what a lot of people say is going on at a macro level in Japan now, is that they're going to try to devalue the yen so as to move back into export-led growth. That's what Abenomics really amounts to. Now, the situation in the Philippines is different because you're still building out the first generation of advanced infrastructure. This is still on the side of the growth pattern where you still have a developing economy. And as a developing economy that's developing not just basic services, but also quite a few high technology intensive things. What you see is you see this pattern compressing, but domestic growth is going to continue to be a big driver in the Philippines.
Okay, great. brought that up because one of the observations made during the March trip was a number of startups in the Philippines have been courted by Singaporean investors. But that comes with having, if they do receive Singaporean investment, the request is that they move to Singapore. And the startups, some of our startups actually decline the investment because they don't want to move to Singapore. And in March, I had a dinner meeting with someone who was actually tapped to run a Singaporean accelerator. Singapore is now looking at putting in their accelerator in the Philippines. If they can't take those companies into their country, they're going to go into the country and invest there and see if they can help grow and nurture those companies. So I thought that too, I found it to be very, very interesting. I don't know if any of the panelists can comment on this fast and accelerated movement that's going on, particularly in the startup. I mean, things that we might have to sort of step back and be a little bit more cautious in terms of how we proceed forward based on activity that's gone, happened in the past. It's all good, it's all positive news, but at the same time, it is green ground. We never had angel investors before. The tech ecosystem is new, and so I think the audience would be interested to hear, what are some of the implications of this rapid growth?
Just briefly, the similar pattern that we saw from Silicon Valley before was the transfer of technology to Taiwan from semiconductor industry, and Don is very familiar with this. So at the time, and this is, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, or more, maybe 20, yeah.
Yeah, early 90s, 20.
The government played a key role in that exercise. So Taiwan identified strategic infrastructure leaders and invested dramatically to do manufacturing in Hsinchu. I don't want to get too much into that, but that pattern it looks similar to what might be going on now, although it's not clear to me that there's a specific industry that we might be pushing for the Philippines. The other similar tech transfer where we've seen a lot of in the last 5 to 10 years is to India in the software space, where they outsource cloud-based services to Indian programmers. And so I think a lot of that's also going on in the Philippines. So those are the two kind of tech transfer exercises we've seen for other countries.
Yeah, I don't really have more comments on that one.
I think one area that the Philippines is now trying to develop and which we try to initiate is putting more content on the creative industry. Many of the software as well as the tech groups here subcontract some of their requirements to the Philippines. And so, especially when you talk about animation, when you talk about all of these other movies that are being created now, a lot of that is done in the Philippines, and not too many people know that. So last year, we were able to bring to the Philippines the likes of Ralph Guggenheim of Pixar, the founders of Pixar, Eli Noyes, and Cartoon Network, Dave, sorry I forget, Dave Barry. And we brought them to the Philippines and we had a seminar of this sort and we invited directors, etc. And startups, including the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communications. And they were amazed at the kind of talent that we had, or have. And therefore they encourage us to go on and develop our creative business rather than just accepting subcontracts. Okay, they're by no means petty cash. No? But if we develop the content ourselves and sold it into the open market, then I think that's one industry that perhaps will be growing in the future. And what they saw was a disconnect between what they called show business. One part of it is business, one part of it is show. We have a lot of show, and we can develop the content for show, as we have been developing this. We do not have enough for business, because I said no matter how good your content is, if it is not marketed, then it's nothing. So there must be show business. That's what Hollywood is all about. So that idea was planted into the minds of those who were in the audience, and these were people of in the business. And so now we're trying to do a second one next year, and hopefully by then we would already have come up with a semi-roadmap as to where we should go in that respect.
So with that, it sounds to me like from a positioning standpoint, definitely the Philippines outside of the global news, the increase in our investment rating, the good governance that is being promoted by our current administration, all the collaborative efforts that are being done is all helping our positioning. So what would be your comments in terms of how will the world perceive, in your opinion, the country in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think that as long as we're able to sustain the perception of stability, not only perception, but actual stability in the country, of transparency and good governance, I think we'll be on our way up.